Good to see you all here. I'm Don Bixby, and my aha moment came, I think, in 1983 when I read an article in the Smithsonian Magazine about the British organization that was concerned about the old British breeds that were being slaughtered from the Royal Zoo. And in a response, some farmers got together to develop a farm park. I was really engaged with the idea of all these different kinds of breeds. In my veterinary practice, I had a chart on the wall in my waiting room of all the dog breeds, and people would sit there and say, "Well, I think my dog is half this and half that," or maybe it's all this or it's all that. But the idea of the plasticity of dogs, all the way from Chihuahuas to Scottish deerhounds, was intriguing to me, and the same thing applies to domestic livestock. I began working as a volunteer with what was then the American Minor Breeds Conservancy. That reminds me of a joke. Everybody has to tell a joke, and this is a really kind of a bad one. A past, present, and future walked into a bar. It was tense. And the reason that's appropriate now is because this organization has had 3 different names depending on, in the past, the American Minor Breeds Conservancy, the American Rare Breeds Conservancy, and now just Livestock Conservancy, which is a lot easier. That's the present. And the future part is important because we need all these pieces to confront the challenges that we're going to have in the future. Leopold's adage about tinkering, I think, is appropriate. To be a successful tinkerer, you have to keep all the pieces. And that's what we're trying to do with this organization. And yeah, I think I'm doing that. Yeah, I am. Oh, there it goes. So the first question is, how many of you have heard of the Livestock Conservancy? And a lot of hands. That's good, because I spent a lot of years where nobody had ever heard of such an organization. And you've all heard of heritage breeds or you wouldn't be here. This terminology seems to be much more resonant with people. We're almost caught up with heirloom tomatoes, but not quite. Am I clicking or somebody else? Thank you. The organization was founded in 1977. I didn't start till several years later, but the goal of the organization was not only to conserve all these different breeds, but also to promote them. Each one of these breeds is a unique package of genetic materials, and as Corinne mentioned this morning, they're culture bearers. These breeds are a product of human selection and also natural selection, but each one is unique, and they have been selected for particular management and particular environments. And so the goal should be to select a breed that fits the goals that you have for management and also the resources that you have, whether it's environmental, financial, time. All of those resources go into livestock production. We work with farmers and anybody else who's interested in conserving this genetic diversity. And the organization is headquartered in Pittsburgh, but you see on the map that all the big states also have the most members. There's a real concentration in North Carolina and Virginia, where there are a lot of small farms and a lot of retired dentists and lawyers who keep rare breeds of livestock for one reason or another. Next. We work with 10 different species, and you see them all there. There's a picture of a representative from each of the species. Next. Here come the endangered breeds and livestock. And I think Silas is going to talk about that.
You go to the next slide. So who am I first? So my name is Silas Bernardoni. I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. I always say, we always talk about, how smart is your farmer, right? And how much are they willing to learn and really dig in? So when we talk about who is our market, we always say, we're not necessarily interested in people that's like, oh, do you grass feed, right? Grass fed, grass finished. It's more, we want to work with people that say like, well, why do you do that, right? What are the benefits? And I think basically my parents grew up in the suburbs and my father was a doctor that wanted to be a farmer. So he decided if he was a doctor, he could farm whenever he wanted to. But if he's a farmer, that's all he had to do for the rest of his life. So he moved to the middle of nowhere and bought a farm. And so on our farm, there's not really the excuse to say, well, that's how we've always done it, right? So there's always research in, I say this with some irony, but you can always like argue with your parents and get your way, but that never, how often does that work for anybody? But really what I've experienced in my life is watching somebody who has a passion for agriculture, but never had any history with it. And then over the course of, 30 plus years, start with commercial breeds. So when I was a small child, we had exclusively commercial breeds. As of today, it's exclusively heritage breeds. So why is that? If you actually look at the sense of place for these animals, right? A lot of commercial breeds, they're not designed to exist in a specific environment. They're designed, whether that's for slaughter, to have consistency or they're just selecting for a very, very narrow band of characteristics, right? So let's go to this. So why are breeds endangered, right? Because so from my perspective, I've watched a farm go from commercial breeds to exclusively heritage breeds. So like, why would they be endangered, right? So here's a fun fact. I don't know if this might be the wrong conversation. So if you look at the Holsteins, right, for dairy and cows, look at the genetic diversity, take the whole herd for the whole United States, how many bulls can you trace that back to? 2. So you have an X and Y chromosome, right? There are only 2 Y chromosomes in the entire herd of the United States Holstein industry, right? So you talk about a shallow gene pool. It's that shallow, right? Why? Because, modern agriculture favors the use of few specialized breeds. And so you find a true genetic, a freak of nature, and then through, first it was selective breeding, and now there's a lot more technology involved. But you can highlight those characteristics and then make that the norm throughout the whole breed, and then basically a more well-rounded animal can't compete with that. So, so basically when you have here's another one. Did anybody know that pigs make nests? Right? That's something that I didn't realize until we, switched from, commercial breeds to heritage breeds, that you have these, and we live in Wisconsin, so you can just, put a round bale in the pen and they'll chew it all up. And then you go down in the winter and all you see is a bunch of snouts sticking out of the hay. It's a big mound of hay with 10 pigs inside of it, right? But really it comes down to genetic diversity, right? We're losing a good percentage of the, our food source. And a lot of it is not even really understood. Just a couple years ago, let's go to the next slide, I think. Somebody click it. There we go. So why does genetic diversity matter, right? So it's like a stock portfolio. You need to diversify. So we're talking about the security of our future. So a lot of people don't realize, they look at a pig is a pig is a pig, but animals just work differently, right? So just a couple years ago, I think I'm not going to get the numbers specifically right, but Purdue was a big research facility, does a lot of porcine research. They were doing artificial insemination on pigs. And so they inseminated all of these heritage breeds, and it was something like 10% of it actually worked. And the researchers were like, we don't know why it didn't work, because it works hundreds of thousands of times, like all the time in commercial agriculture. So why is it feel like? And frankly, they were just at a loss for words. So you look at it like it's security for the future. So if you have one of the leading research universities that just flat out can't explain why something that is common every day in the entire industry in the whole United States, and it was something like half of the sows didn't get pregnant. Of those that got pregnant, then like all of them were stillbirths except for a very, very small percentage. I mean, it was absolutely striking what it was. You didn't even need math to explain what was going on. Well, no one knows what's going on, but what happened. So you look at like the Irish potato famine, right? It's all one variety. So we're looking at, going back to the Holstein example, we're approaching that, right? And I don't think just whether it's climate change or, water, the writing has been on the wall, and people are like, they're noticing. They've been noticing my whole life, right? But we're not really doing anything about it. We just keep like kind of barreling forwards. And so, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so how do you do that, right? Because it's something that just like climate change. It's something that I think it's general consensus, overwhelming consensus if you're scientifically minded. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do that. But I think a big thing is awareness. I mean, there are very few people in the United States that when you go, that what breed of animal. If you go buy your meat at the grocery store, right? I mean, at least in my household, like how old was it? What was the sex, breed? What is it, a crossbred? Was it not? It's like every night's a tasting experiment. But I mean, what I think we need, and what I think Livestock Conservancy is that we need people to be more engaged and more aware of their food source. Like it's not. I had a friend. We were down in the pig barn. He said, I want to be involved in the whole process. He said, I want to like go and have it be slaughtered and all that. And I said, no. You want to be involved in the whole process. And there was a brand new litter of pigs. It's like, you tell me which one of those cute little baby pigs you want to eat, and we'll go put an ear tag in it, and then you come back, and then you're the one that can do that. He's like, no. And he totally walked away from it, right? Because I don't know. I always say that there's a correlation between how cute something is and how delicious it is when you eat it. At least when they're babies, right? But yeah, so I think it's just making it accessible, and Ken will talk next. But when we're looking at it, it's not heritage breeds versus commercial breeds, right? There's so much diversity within heritage breeds, so much more diversity, right? That it's not necessarily that, okay, well, heritage breeds didn't work because I tried this one breed, so let's go to the more like, whether you go to a state college, more conventional agriculture. It's more like, well, maybe that one didn't work, right? That breed didn't work. Is there another breed that you could work within their breed standards to achieve what you want to achieve? Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so current projects, right? So we have the Master Breeder Program, right? So Livestock Conservancy works through the breed associations. I think we're up to 155 breed associations throughout the country. And so that's one of the things, you look at selective breeding and all that, you have to stay within the breed characteristics. So on our farm, 20 years ago, we started with Scottish Highland cattle, right? And I'm a number cruncher. My families too. So we're just looking at like, what are the production metrics that they're seeing in the UK, right? It's where it came from. And then what are we seeing on our farm in Wisconsin? We kept trying to, through genetics and everything, we just tried for 15 years trying to get the production that we wanted, the performance, and we just could not get it. So 5 years ago, we decided to switch breeds to red polls, right? So again, staying within the heritage breeds. And it's been very interesting watching the two breeds side by side. And the interesting thing is we're up in Wisconsin, like it gets really cold. It gets really, really cold. But the winters weren't the problem. It was the summers. So now you put them out on pasture and the Highlands are sitting in the shade with their tongues hanging out, just trying to survive, and the red poles are out grazing. You know? And so we were thinking, okay, this is Wisconsin, let's think about getting something to overwinter. But that really wasn't our problem. And now that we have two breeds of cattle out there grazing side by side, it's a no-brainer. And so I think like just keeping an idea, because where I'm going with this master breeder program is, what we can't have is like, so in that example with Highlands, we start bringing in genetics that are like deviating from the breed standards. We're not doing justice to breed stewardship of those animals. So how do you find the right genetics for your operation, what you want to achieve, and achieve that within the breed standards? That's what we need for that, to maintain that diversity, because otherwise it all gets all muddled and mixed. So through the master breeder program, I mean, there's an incredible amount of knowledge that is in people's heads throughout the whole, in society, right? So it's really a program that goes out and interviews people, sits down, takes the time to talk through them, and tries to gather as much information as you can possibly, we can get, and then try and capture it in a way that can then be distributed amongst other people that are more interested in learning those things. Go next slide. Yeah, so outreach and promotion. So if any of you have organizations like this or conferences, I think that's one thing that we're always really interested in, is working with other organizations, because, you know, Livestock Conservancy really works with the breed associations. We work a lot of times we're working through other organizations, not necessarily primarily as the Livestock Conservancy. Do you want to take that a little bit? You have, as far as working with the breed associations, and I think you'd have more to add than I have on that one. So here, you can just take this one.
Well, the breed associations are kind of an interesting group of groups, because people get impassioned about their livestock, and they get ideas that they're sure right, and sometimes they're not the same ideas everybody else has. So a lot of that becomes like United Nations, trying to get people to consider other people's opinions and find common ground about how breeds should be managed. The challenge is that many of the breeds were developed sort of in regional environments, in cultural environments that don't exist everywhere, and sometimes don't exist anywhere. So we do work with breed associations to help them develop diplomatic ways of moving forward with their breeds, developing stock books and pedigree documentation, bylaws, and all of that sort of governmental background that any organization of humans needs to keep things under control. One of the things that Silas was talking about is selecting breeds for particular environments, and I think the Southwest is a particularly interesting region because of the brittleness of the environment here. But we have a long history of Spanish livestock production here, and Navajo-Churro sheep, I think, is one of the breeds of particular interest because they've been here for over 400 years and have been selected by both Hispanic and Native American shepherds to thrive in this environment and to produce a range of products that are useful for survival of the humans that are taking care of them. Ken's going to talk about a particular cattle breed, also of Spanish origin, called Criollos, but there are also Corrientes and Piney Woods in East Texas and Texas Longhorn. Those are all Spanish-derived breeds. We tend to think in America in Anglo points of view, because many of the breeds were that we use are from Northern Europe, but the Spanish were here a century earlier with their livestock, so they've got a head start, particularly in the Southwest and also in the Southeast, where there are Florida cracker cattle and Gulf Coast native sheep and St. Croix sheep, some of those Spanish animals that were, or breeds that were selected for those environments.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
So before we hand it off to Ken, so I was telling Ken earlier today, I think he's the most interesting person at this conference. Why? Because he alone is basically a case study for the, like I said, a pressure, right? No, but looking at it from our perspective, and that, there's a lot of well-intentioned people out there. As Don said, there's a lot of retired dentists and lawyers that, are well-intentioned, altruistic, that want to get into, and help move the needle a bit, do something meaningful. But the big challenge is, how do you do that in an economically viable way? So this is one thing that I've been passionate about within the Livestock Conservancy is, how do you maintain these breeds as economically viable production animals, right? Because in any breed association, you have whether it's always like show versus production, right? Because those, I think, for the uninitiated, those are very different things. You think that, they should be able to find the middle, but actually nothing comes to mind that actually has done that, right? So for us, when we're looking at heritage breeds, it's actually pretty rare when you have somebody that's working at scale to try and support themselves and their family. Because, agriculture is a hard business in general, right? And so, like I said, it's really a case study on what we're trying to do as a breed, so that, and I'll let him tell his story, but just realize, like, that's part of this is, like, how do we make this financially doable for the right reasons and let people be successful within that, right? Because the best way to save a food animal is to get more people to eat that animal, right? You say that to the knitting crowd and they just don't like it, but it's true. So that's really where Ken's coming from. So yeah, how's that for a build up? Anyway, so like I said, kind of case study on our end as far as what we need and how you can make that comparison.
Well, just right. I appreciate that introduction. I'm going to wait a second here until my slides come up. It's all right. I'll take my boots off. Yeah, don't. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Lausten, and my family owns and operates Kachuma Ranch, which is in Dolores, Colorado. So we're in the southwest part of the state. We also ranch in Disappointment Valley, which is about 40 miles north of Dolores. We raise Criollo and Angus cattle. We've started recently to crossbreed our Criollo cows with Angus bulls. We sell grass-finished beef at several local farmers markets, restaurants as well, and the Southwest Farm Fresh Co-op located in Cortez. So I wanted to chat a little bit about our yearly cattle cycle and how we move cattle around. We're able to move from high elevation summer pastures down through the length of Disappointment Valley, ending up at lower elevation winter and spring pastures. We move much like the wildlife do. We're able to migrate, always following feed and water as we wind our way up and down Disappointment Valley. So we just moved our cattle off of our Forest Service grazing permit. It's located just south of Groundhog Mountain in the San Juan National Forest. Elevations there range from 8,200 feet along Groundhog Creek up to 9,800 feet. Most of our grazing lies at 9,000 feet and above there. We rotate a combined herd of Criollo and Angus cows through 4 pastures during the summertime, where we graze both introduced and native grasses and browse from mid-June through mid-October. So we just came off of our summer allotment and moved the cattle to the west, where they come into Disappointment Valley. That's where we graze deeded land, and we have a BLM winter grazing permit there as well. That's about 7,000 feet in elevation, and here they graze a balance of grasses and browse. They rely heavily on browse depending on the season, as snow can cover up the grass in that country and limit accessibility. So midwinter, we continue down the valley again, grazing both deeded and leased private land pastures until they reach the west end of the valley, about 5,500 feet elevation. That's where we calve mid-spring and then prepare to move back up the valley onto our summer allotment in June. So we also use irrigated pasture, both deeded and leased, for our operation. We have a great working relationship with the Montezuma Land Conservancy and lease one of their properties called Fozzie's Farm, where we grow and finish cattle there on their irrigated land. So I also wanted to chat a little bit about our kind of experiences and observations with cattle, with the Criollos in particular. I thought it was great that part of this year's theme was water. We think a lot in terms of watersheds where we're ranching. We understand this is a fragile landscape with a very unique history of erosion. The Dolores River, of which watershed we ranch in, is the largest contributor of salt to the Colorado River, and Disappointment Creek is the largest contributor of salt to the Dolores River. The Dolores River changes from a fairly clean river to one of the dirtiest in the Southwest after its confluence with Disappointment Creek, which carries an estimated 250,000 tons of sediment and 10,000 tons of salt down the Dolores annually. So one way we feel that the Criollo can be advantageous in an environment like this is their preference to not spend as much time in riparian areas. So our cattle will come down, they'll get a drink, they will go back up to the top where they're to graze and rest. And this is also in part because they like to lay down in places where they have the best sight visibility. Less time in riparian areas means less erosion, and smaller and lighter cattle means less compacted and smaller trails, which is a clear advantage in places containing biological soil crusts like cryptobiotic soil, which is very prominent in the valley. This is kind of what we think of as the heritage breed advantage. And one way we can use these unique genetics to reduce our impact in highly sensitive and erosive areas. So let me go through a different picture here. Kind of forgot about that. So one observation is that Criollos are they're very cautious cattle. They prefer to bed down in areas where there are long sight distances. This is their DNA at work, as keeping open space between themselves and trees or brush while bedding down allows them to spot potential predators. While this has advantages, it can cause management concerns, which we have experienced when running cattle in heavily wooded areas such as thick, dense aspen stands. We have noticed some of our cattle are reluctant to enter these stands, and we're preparing to day herd these cattle into these areas to maximize our pasture utilization. Not all the Criollos are that reluctant to move into the heavy timber like that, but this is a very non-desert-like environment, which we are training them to be in. So one interesting note is our Angus cattle don't seem to have this problem. They will walk into the thickest aspens and waddle out with a 600-pound calf. That's great, but we're also hoping to use the Angus to teach the Criollos to move through these pastures as we're all learning this country together over the last several years. One note about Criollos as well is that they're very curious cattle and they like to travel. So this can lead to issues with fences. They can potentially be prone to jump fences just to check out new country. Most of the time they jump back in, but you never know for sure. We have noticed this on some of our summer pastures where there is a variety of fences, including lay-down fences, which are designed to withstand heavy snowfall by taking the fences down during the winter months. So it can be a little more of a challenge to keep these guys content. At least that's been our experience up at elevation, for sure. So regarding criollos and predators, we're certain to see how criollos act when wolves begin to play an active role in our ecosystem. Our cattle are cautious of the thick aspen stands now because they can't see into them and they're worried about predators. When wolves arrive, they will have reason to feel like that, and I'm wondering how our role as land managers will change when wolves are reintroduced into our area. So we kind of feel that's like 5 to 10 years is at the maximum when they'll be there. The wolves coming through. So it's my hope that the criollo cattle will have a better chance of coexisting with wolves. Because they have highly maternal instincts, their ability to work together to fend off a threat, and they have horns. So we have seen instances of cows forming a loose circle around calves when a perceived threat was in their area, and they no doubt will work together if a threat is in their area. However, we're not sure how that will eventually work out when wolves really become active in this ecosystem up there. The wolves are sure to join us, as we migrate from the higher elevation summer pastures and on down into Disappointment Valley. So, another note about criollos is, they're small and athletic. Our cows average about 925 pounds. And they can access forage in places where larger breeds find it difficult to do so. I have seen criollos grazing at very steep, hard to access terrain. I kind of questioned whether it was nutritionally beneficial for them to go to those places and work so hard just to graze the tops off of Chamisha and four-winged saltbush, which is very prominent in our area. And this is all done by eating snow and drinking melted runoff in the afternoons. There's not a lot of water in that country, so that's a big advantage. When cattle travel and utilize these areas, they reduce the amount of impact in places that are more sensitive to grazing pressure. These are places that have been traditionally used by cattle because they are easier to graze, easier access. So these guys will go above and beyond to find the resources they need to thrive. So some notes on crossbreeding. We've been raising the straight purebred criollos, and this last year we decided to start crossbreeding using Angus bulls. The real reason for doing that is first to have a very thrifty cow herd made up of criollo cows on the landscape, and crossing them with beef bulls really incorporates more growth-related genetics into our grass finishing program. So currently we're finishing criollos at about 28 to 30 months old, and they're 850 to 900 pounds. This is kind of a challenging model as the cost of production for lighter yielding cattle is high when compared to like British or continental breeds that possess stronger growth traits. So crossing our criollo cows with Angus bulls will allow us to utilize old and new genetics. We're expecting to be able to increase our finishing weight on steers to around 1,000 pounds and decrease the finishing time to about 24 months or maybe a little bit less, depending on the genetics there. So that's one advantage of a crossbreeding program that we've found. So one challenging aspect of having the criollo cattle, heritage cattle like this, is their lack of value on the conventional market. Cattle with horns and varied colors will be heavily discounted, making it difficult to sell any class of cattle on the conventional market and be profitable. Criollos can be sold as roping cattle as well, but it's pretty hard to make any money doing that. Taking the cattle to proper finishing weight and direct marketing the beef is one way to overcome this financial obstacle. And crossbreeding with beef bulls will produce a calf that is more likely to be solid colored, well muscled, and weigh more at weaning. Therefore, adding value to the animal from a conventional marketing standpoint. Another interesting thing about crossbreeding is if you're using homozygous polled bulls on top of horned criollo cows, those calves will not have horns. And so while we can dehorn if they're born naturally without horns, that's just one less thing we have to worry about. As we have noticed that several processors in the area they're restricted. They're more hesitant to take on any kind of horned cattle because it's a little more labor on their end. So breeding them to be polled, it opens up different processing locations, and it's great to have flexibility like that. So regarding the finishing animals and the criollos in particular is their ability to produce excellent quality beef. We harvest our cattle when they're in their natural prime and the beef is tender and well marbled. One important factor in producing beef is the environment in which the animal was raised, and we often see a cow with 2 or 3 generations of her calves all grazing and resting together, and this is the lowest stress way to raise cattle for our finishing program, as they are truly content cattle like that. The beef quality is recognized by our customers as well, who are so thankful for it, and this makes it possible to obtain repeat customers year after year. One note about criollo cattle and really the kind of the grass finishing of all breeds is making sure those beeves possess enough fat to marble well. While nearly all grass finished beef will be leaner than the grain fed alternative, making sure that grass finished beeves will marble and possess an adequate amount of healthy fats, both to add flavor to the beef, but also provide the nutritional benefits associated with grass-fed fats in our diet. That's one way we are absolutely able to hook customers by having a well-finished grass-fed product, and the difference is noticeable. So kind of to end on a story with you guys about last year. So coming off of our summer allotment and going on to our BLM allotment this last fall, we were lucky to receive some late season rains in Disappointment Valley, and the cool season grasses were actively growing well into the season that we traditionally dormant season graze that location. We were concerned that the cattle going in would select these growing plants, potentially causing their roots to contract and inhibit their ability to store energy as they go into winter dormancy. So we made a decision to sell some cattle, buy extra hay, and rest all of our property out in Disappointment Valley. It was a challenging decision. However, this last spring we had some earlier season rains, and the plants came out of dormancy as healthy as they could be. Essentially, they were primed to make the best use of the rainfall we did receive. So this story is one that we've been able to really relate to our customers, as they understand that we're managing both the cattle and the land that we're grazing on a little bit different, but we were able to really emphasize that through purchasing our grass-fed beef, we were financially able to destock, purchase hay, and rest our pastures in Disappointment Valley. We really let them know that their dollar is helping to protect that acre. That's very useful when trying to capture long-term customers. That's what we've found. And our customers know that when it's time to graze again, our heritage criollo cattle will lead the way and help to maintain the healthy balance that we so desire for our rangelands. So I guess I should do some pictures now, huh? Or has it been going this whole time? I don't know. So that's, yeah. So that's I think the main part of the speech there, and these pictures going through do have some captions on them, just kind of highlighting some of the country that we're ranching in. Again, it varies so much from the 5,500 foot elevation all the way up to nearly 10,000. But yeah, that's a little history on our cattle cycle there and how we're marketing our beef. So, yeah, happy to take any questions if needed. Yeah. Huh? Are we doing?
All right, we'll just start up the front and work our way back.
Sounds
I think
good.
we got about 20 minutes for questions, so we'll see if we can stump them.
I'm familiar with another operation that's doing a similar thing with Charlet Cross.
Oh, yeah.
Do you all raise your own replacements?
We do. Part of the reason we stayed doing straight Criollo cattle is because we were getting these amazing purebred replacement heifers, and they're wonderful gals. Many of those are in the cow herd now, or they are bred as first calf heifers. So I have half-blood, so Angus and Criollo heifers and steers as well. We just weaned a set of those guys, and I'm going to keep those back and put them into the cow herd, the half-blood heifers. That's really the future of some of the heritage breeds like this. Will be more practical in the rangeland from a crossbreeding standpoint. So one example would be if you have an Angus Criollo heifer that ends up in the cow herd, and you breed that gal back to an Angus bull, it's very, very hard to tell that those calves have any Criollo difference, and so or Criollo influence, and so you're less likely to have negative traits come out that can be docked or discounted on the conventional market. You can kind of hide some of those traits, all still while having a lower maintenance cow herd out on the rangeland. So
I just follow up with that. The reason that they don't raise their own replacements there is the reason you mentioned. They can buy the Criollo cattle so cheap, it doesn't pay them to have another herd to raise purebred replacements. That's one of the reasons they find this the most profitable cattle operation they've ever run.
That's an interesting note for sure. And yeah, I had the opportunity to sell some of these half-blood heifers, but they're so nice, and so they're on our program, and we're going to keep them and see how that works for sure. But we're pretty excited to watch them grow up, no doubt. So, thank you.
I guess I'm interested. Is there a difference, or what is the difference between like a Criollo and a Corriente?
Sure.
Because we're using Corriente crossbred cattle. And
so the main difference is that Criollos are specifically bred for beef purposes, and Corrientes are more used for sport practices, like with rodeos for roping cattle. So they might look exactly the same. The only difference being the yields on the Criollo cattle are no doubt higher than they would be on a straight Corriente. Through crossbreeding, that can be changed for sure. But the true Criollos are smaller in stature but well muscled, kind of like, I don't know if you can see the bull picture up right there, but they contain a fair amount of muscle on every animal, and that's one of the main differences. Some of the Corriente breeders that are looking for nowadays, they're breeding for traits that are like mature cows that weigh 600 pounds, so they can rope longer. They will have kind of longer, thinner back legs, and that's for roping purposes. So the Criollos, again, they kind of have that classic short but beefy stature, and they get around the country really well with that body type for sure.
All right, we're going to head back.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but are you selling by cuts, or are you selling by halves or wholes, or how are you selling your livestock?
So we sell a couple different ways. We sell retail at farmers markets, and then we will often sell quarter, half, and whole beeves, depending on, so it's pretty common for someone to come try a pound of ground beef and then come back, and I'll put a lot of custom beef bundles together for people as well, where I can let them kind of pick and choose what cuts they're interested in, and then that oftentimes leads to bigger purchases, like a quarter or half of beef. I must say too that a lot of our customers are they're retired, and they're able to afford this product. It's expensive. We have a lot of money going into each one of these animals, and so essentially the people that we're selling to, they're able to afford this product. They love the quality, and they also, I think a lot of it has to do with how we're managing our rangelands, and they know that, they see that, and they want to support it, and so they're able to support it, and we're happy to be there, when that time comes for them to try to purchase some beef for sure. So
We have some online attendees that have some questions. We're going to jump into some of those.
Yeah. Dude, what?
Thanks. Here's from our virtual audience.
Virtual.
Wondering if there are any problems with calving from the crossing of Angus bull to Criollos?
I haven't. One unique trait about the Criollo cattle is they have a relatively high tail head and a larger pelvic opening. Also, from a genetic standpoint, it seems like the smaller traits will kind of mask the larger traits from like a beef type bull. And so we'll have a 925 pound cow that'll have a 60 pound, 70 pound calf, and they do okay. I would be very hesitant to use Angus or any type of beef bull on a first calf Criollo heifer, just because of the size difference. We use Criollo bulls on the first calf heifers, and there's absolutely no problems. They have great maternal instincts, and they're able to just calve easily, and those calves are extremely vigorous. When they get up and start to nurse, like that usually happens pretty fast, and they're just able to. They're way more mobile than the larger, kind of bulkier beef breeds. Which those calves, they're born with the genetic potential to grow fast, and it can kind of weigh them down when they're younger a bit. But the Criollos are pretty athletic, and we've been lucky with not having any calving problems whatsoever in that regard.
Thank you. Also, from the virtual audience, are you maintaining a seed stock herd of Criollos as well?
We are not. Originally, we started with some registered Criollos that we acquired from a couple different breeders, and we decided to start crossbreeding completely with as we were able to acquire our Forest Service allotment this last year. And one rule by the Forest Service is if you purchase an allotment, a grazing allotment, you have to either purchase 90% of the seller's existing herd or a base property that's tied to that allotment. So we essentially purchased the cows that were with the allotment, and our original idea was to transition over to Criollos over several years, using the Angus cattle to kind of show the Criollos around up on our summer country. And so that we're kind of right in the middle of that process right now. Yep, for sure.
All right, got a question back here. Zach?
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you balance the economic component and the advantages that come with doing more traditional or conventional English breeds versus the sort of the ecological impacts and the management on the other side. Like we do heritage breed pork for the most part, so it's a little bit different, but it's always really hard to sort of look at, well, we have this part Yorkshire pig that grows piglets out twice as fast, and it seems like it would be you'd make a lot more money doing it that way, but then these other Mongolitsa red wattle pigs just taste so much better, and they're so much nicer and easier to work with. Like, where do you guys sort of, what are the cues you take to draw that line?
I think that's where the crossbreeding is so important, is because we're able to have the low maintenance cow herd out on the landscape that is more cost effective to run on these native rangelands, and then crossing with the beef bull. It kind of gives us the best of both worlds right there. So as I said earlier, one of the real challenges with raising the straight bred Criollos and taking them to 30 months and 900 pounds, and the associated smaller yields that you have with those animals, then it means that it's an expensive product. It costs a lot to raise for not as much beef. So we were able to buy through crossbreeding. It's our intent to both increase the yield we have per animal and decrease the amount of time it takes to get that yield, and that's all money in the pocket right there. So the bottom line with the straight heritage breeds, I think financially can be challenging, but when you have country like that we're ranching in, they're just such a fit for that area that it makes sense from a rangeland health standpoint. Like no doubt they're perfect for that country, and we're kind of like right in the middle of trying to figure out financially how we can add value in a respectable amount of time to every one of our finishing animals that we sell.
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to add is we often hear this, that you have, so like the question is you have got commercial breed versus a heritage breed. And so one thing that we're trying to educate people on is that it's not necessarily heritage versus everybody else. It's not really that way. So what it could be, by the way, we raise Tamworth, which are pretty close to red wattle, right? So I fully appreciate what you're talking about. And so I think it's also just realize it's not kind of commercial versus heritage. It might just be that heritage breed is not working for you. And so that you could go with another heritage breed, right? Because I think they're more versatile as far as, yes, it might be throwing out piglets twice as much, twice as fast, but how much as far as like ease of their quality mothering, all these other things, right? So confinement farrowing, that's one of the reasons why we chose Tamworth. So there's a lot more characteristics than just basically the number of piglets they're throwing out. But what I wanted to comment on is we're trying to get away from this, okay, well, this one breed didn't work for us, therefore we're going to just kind of throw the whole heritage thing in the garbage and go back to more commercial breeds, right? Like there is so much more variety there that we're hoping people will experiment with.
You also have to keep in mind that you're not producing the same product that people buy at Smith's or Kroger's for 98 cents a pound. And so marketing is part of the issue with particularly the meat products of heritage breeds. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that there are services that are not completely converted to dollars. And Alejandro was talking this morning about this mixed flocks and mixed herds. And pastoralists all over the world have always mixed their flocks. If you're only raising cattle, it's monocrop. So there have to be some other things on your land, even if it's only dung beetles. But sheep and goats and cattle and yaks and llamas and all of those things all eat differently. And so whatever your piece of ground is growing, some different species or different breeds will utilize it in different ways. Silas was talking about Highland cattle. We think of cattle as grazers, but I have a friend who suddenly discovered he had a new view from his house because his Highland cattle were riding the trees down, the sapling trees down. One would ride it down and the other would eat the tops off the trees. Another friend had fainting goats, and all of a sudden they had a new view because the goats were eating the understory up on the dogwood so you could see out underneath. So all these creatures utilize the land in a different way. And so if what's not working for you, you should try something else.
Over here with another question. You guys are treating the Q&A session with me like you're at an auction with just subtle winks and nods. You can be bold hand raisers, and then I will come to you. All right, so over here.
So this is for the whole panel. Maybe we could dig in a little more of what you guys have been talking about. Just Ken's discussion about taking this heritage breed but then doing the crossbreeding, and then before lunch, just Alejandro talking about the really intensive culling to try to have a herd that fits your situation. How do you balance trying to have a heritage breed and maintain those genetics, or keep that breed strong, with trying to find what works for you in your operation and your financials?
So I think from a genetic standpoint, we were able to source more purebred cattle when we need to, but for the time being, we have enough of a solid herd and a really good genetic base that we have options on how to breed the cattle and to select certain ones that we want for either for finishing or for breeding. So maintaining the genetic diversity for us with the crossbreeding program, that essentially will be lost, but I'm able to through connections that we have, I can bring in new genetics when needed. I think for us that'll be a few years down the road because we have a pretty decent, it's a modest sized group of criollos, but a lot of the cattle in there are younger cattle and they have a lot of breeding life left. A lot of these heritage breeds like this, they have they have the ability to be longer lived as well. So it's not uncommon to have a 13, 14, 15-year-old criollo cow that's still in good condition and raising good calves. So that's one heritage breed advantage as well, is that the longevity in the cow herd might be a little bit more than 10, 11, 12-year-old Angus or kind of continental type cattle, for sure. Is that? Yeah. Say so. Smart.
So one thing that I think of is the saying, you can't, if you don't measure something, you can't manage it, right? So it's very important. I don't know. I mean, people anthropomorphize animals and you have relationships, right? So it's like, oh, but she's such a nice pig. Like, yeah, but that decision and that emotions in the way of these culling decisions has real costs, right? Not just the carrying the cost of maintenance and everything else that animal is causing, but then, for their offspring and, it's multi-year kind of downstream consequences. So really, I think it's like understanding like what you want to get out of your animals and then coming up with the key performance indicators. And then throughout your operation, whether that's, writing down the dates, dates and weights. How often do you weigh them? I mean, we're in Wisconsin, so it's a lot shorter of a walk from pasture to the scale for us than it is for Ken. So, I mean, we have very detailed records, but really for us, it's making sure that we're collecting the data that we feel we need to make good decisions, right? So, I mean, I think, for example, we had a drought in 2012. So instead of doing our rotational grazing, we had to put them in a feedlot and feed them grass. So when we had to do that, we could then see which ones are more tolerant to parasites, right? So that to us, it's like, it really showed which is what. So now we had to give them some wormer, but then they all get black tagged and they're out. So I think it's observing what you're doing in their response, but then also trying to get it down into data, making data-driven decisions, and then keeping them all on the level so that you get all that emotion out of your decision.
But the foreplay is to know what the characteristics are of the breeds that you're choosing and make appropriate choices. What Silas was talking about is after you get the animals on your place, then see how they behave. And as Alejandro said this morning, you need to cull 20% every year. That means you need to have more than 4 cows, but culling is how you select for good performance in your operation with the resources that you have available.
Well, one other thing, so we cull very hard, and what we've found is that a lot of our cull use, especially specifically about sheep, we actually sell those for other people's breeding stock, right? So it might not meet our standards, but we're culling 30% of our flock some years because it's kind of like a 2 strikes you're out, right? Because like we don't want singles, we don't want triplets. So you get 1 strike, usually your first year. So that any of that, black tag, you're gone. Other people are willing to put up with that. So you see is we can just, and because we do the record keeping, we can see, we actually have it graphed out, like what is our, annual number of lambs per ewe. We can actually see it go up and up and up and up and up. So you can, if you do the math and you track it diligently, you can see the results. And if, like I said, if you set it high enough, we're not selling them to the sale barn. We're selling to other people who don't have that high of standards.
Or you can eat them to save them. We're going to have a round table tomorrow morning, so if there are other questions. Are we done?
We are short on time. You guys have had a lot of great information. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the next part of the schedule. Thank you guys so much.